Doctors and nurses of Reddit, have you ever witnessed a couple have a child that was obviously not the father's? If so, what happened? Story 1. Not a doctor, she, nurse, but my ex-girlfriend delivered a baby while I was in the delivery room, and turns out it wasn't mine. She was 16, I was 15. All along, I was under the impression that this kid was mine, and time to be an adult. Took all the classes, read the books, worked every night weekend to save whatever money I could as a 15-year-old. I finally get the call she's in labor, so I have somebody rush me to the ER. Luckily for her, it wasn't a long labor, only about 6 hours, but there was a complication. The baby came out with the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck. Doctor assured us it was going to be okay, but the nurses were prepping for things to go south. Baby comes out, it's a light shade of purple, and the nurses immediately take the baby and put on the smallest mask you have ever saw, to help it get oxygen, I guess. I was too panicked to ask a lot of questions. They state they need to keep the baby on watch overnight, so I stay in the room with the ex. The next evening, baby is back in the room with us, and all seems well. The ex is asleep, and the same nurse from the night before comes into the room and beckons me out. She states that at risk of her losing her job, she has to break some harsh news to me. That kid is not mine. She stated that while at this stage it wasn't obvious, over the next few weeks it would become clear this kid was mixed, and since both of us were white, it was a high probability that it wasn't mine. Cue a mixed bag of emotions, and me promptly waking the ex to get a little clarification. Come to find out, she knew the chances, and was just hoping it was mine because it worked better for her. Apparently, her father was old-school racist, and she didn't want to have to deal with that. I left the hospital to collect my thoughts, and a few weeks later was served with child support papers. One DNA test, and about 6 weeks later, I am 0% that kid's father. Wherever that nurse is now, I hope your life is amazing. I understand that you were not supposed to get involved in the personal side of things and keep it professional, but you saved me a lot of additional headache. Story 2. Similar, but I don't know where else to put it because it just makes me laugh. My aunt is a nurse in the maternity ward. She had a couple come in where they were both very black. Lady has baby and it is white AF. Like, totally pale. No trace of any pigment. They put the baby on her mom, and the mom starts yelling about how this isn't her baby, and they stole her baby. In all fairness, you can be very confused during after delivery. It wasn't stupidity. Just sobbing and freaking out, and the father is just sitting there and looks very confused, Bekasuo. Even he's realizing that even if she did cheat, there is no way the baby would be that white. The doctor and nurses are trying to assure her that this is her baby, and the skin usually darkens later. Come to find out, when he called his mom, she pointed out that they have a second cousin who is albino, and maybe baby got that gene. Turns out that's what happened. Baby was albino. Story 3. My fiancé's father is almost certainly not his biological dad. His mom was just a genuinely terrible human being who didn't even try to hide the fact she was cheating. But his dad loved him from the second he was born, and when the mom decided 4 years later she just didn't want the kid anymore, she just gave him to his dad and rode off. G's dad ended up getting married, and they tried for kids before finding out his count was too low to ever father children. They ended up adopting many years later. He sat my fiancé down when my fiancé was 13 and told him the truth and that if Jay wanted to test they would, but it was up to him. Jay cried and told him he just wanted him to be his dad, and that was the end of that. Edit. I originally had put real dad instead of biological dad. Changed it when several people pointed out that the man who raised him is most certainly his real dad. Story 4. I know a girl who was pregnant with her boyfriend's best friend's baby. He found out there was a possibility about a week before she gave birth. I went up to see her once he was born, and he looked just like the friend, there was no question. I broke the news to her boyfriend, and he was absolutely devastated. His parents were heartbroken and super pissed. They had bought the girl everything she needed, including a $500 car seat Sacher stroller set. She refused to give anything back. She started up a relationship with the friend immediately after having their child, and they're still together a decade later. But the kicker for me has always been that the boyfriend and best friend were next-door neighbors. She moved into his house after coming home from the hospital, so her ex-boyfriend and his family had to see them basically every day raising this child that they had believed to be his for the entire pregnancy. I can't even imagine. Edit. Yes, they did a DNA test right after he was born. The baby was the friend's. Story 5. I had a vasectomy. While chatting with the doctor, he told me about another patient. This guy had 3 kids and came in for the snip because he and his wife decided they were done having children. The doc opened up his sack and found nothing to snip. This guy was born without the ability to have any children. The poor doctor had to explain to him what happened. Imagine finding that out that way. Story 6. I worked as a lab tech before I became a nurse. We had a set of twins in the NICU that were super early, and the mom was still in the OR getting sewed up from the cesarean. I was drawing baby B's blood when mom was wheeled over to baby A's isolette. She was crying and said, "Oh, thank God you're not black. I have been so worried the last 7 months." So newborn babies, especially when they're born early, are very pink, almost red. So even if a baby was part black, their skin isn't necessarily dark yet. But looking at these babies, it was obvious they were going to be black. The shape of the face, the texture of the hair, and baby B that I was working on had an intense Mongolian spot. A few weeks later, my NICU nurse friend told me that the babies were now on a no info status, meaning security alert. Can't give anyone information about them, can't refer to them by name, etc. She said there was a huge fight because the mom's husband, white guy, obviously noticed that the babies were half black and that mom had cheated on him and got pregnant. The real dad, black guy, came in and didn't realize the mom was even married. Those poor babies. Story 7. I had the opposite happen, sort of. My wife and I are both brown-skinned, dark-haired half-Mexicans, and our moms are both 100% white blondes, with blue and green eyes. So we sort of knew it was a shoot with our baby, but the nurse who was assisting with delivery had no idea. At one point, she gets sort of nervous and calls for help, and another, I guess more senior nurse came in and nodded and came over to talk to me. I thought there was something wrong with the baby as she comes over and stumbles through some questions. So I was the father and no one else was coming, etc. Then finally she awkwardly asks if either of us happened to be blonde growing up. I said, yeah, I was, and both the baby's grandparents are blonde as they come. And this wave of relief went over her, and she brought me over to see this blonde as crowning baby head. It's funny because he looks just like me if you applied a gringo Instagram filter. We often get awkward questions about his heritage, and my wife always hits them with, "Yeah, we're not sure if he's mine." It's always funny to see people nod for a moment and then go, "Wait, what?" Story 8. Had a college buddy whose fiancée was pregnant. They were the perfect couple. Both had just over a year with great careers starting out. Everything was butterflies and rainbows. Fast forward to the delivery room, they're in there, and out comes a very black baby. He's quite the pale redhead, and she's a blonde, blue-eyes Texas girl. He made sure everyone was okay, waited for her parents to arrive, and left without saying a word. He moved all his stuff out of the house while she was in the hospital, and cut off all communications with her, just walked out of their lives in the most stone-cold act I'd ever seen. They were together for 9 years, and he just left cold turkey. She tried to contact him at his job a few times, but he quickly moved up the ladder and eventually got a job in another city. He told me once that he took solace in the fact that her family had already dropped about 10Ks in a wedding that never happened. Edited typo. Story 9. I used to work with a guy whose wife was pregnant. Near time for delivery, everyone at our place of business had a big party with gifts, money, etc. So big day comes, water breaks, they get in car to go to hospital. She breaks the news on the way there, it's not his. The kid is another race, and if he could just drop her off at the hospital and then leave, that would be great. He took a few days off work, found a new apartment, moved out, filed divorce, etc. He called into work and told someone what happened. News spread pretty fast. All congratulations cards, etc. were cleaned up and thrown away. Everyone was very sensitive to his pain. Except, somehow, I don't know how, I did not get the news. So on his first day back, I walked into the office he shared with 6 to 7 other guys and said, Hey, daddy-o, how's fatherhood so far? Getting any sleep? Got some pictures? Let's see the little tyke." He slowly lifted his head to look at me with a painful look. The room was dead silent. One of his workmates stood up, grabbed my arm and walked me out of the room, shushing me. "What happened?" I asked. "Did it die? What's the problem?" When he told me I about died myself, I still feel bad for the dude, and it's been 30 years. Story 10. Oh man, I'm so late to this thread. I used to work in the newborn nursery at a hospital. We got the babies right from delivery, cleaned them up, footprinted them, checked vitals, etc. Dads usually came in with the newborns. This dad comes in with this baby. Dad is white, mom is white, baby is very obviously not white. The dad was very quiet standing next to this baby, watching us clean it up. He says quietly, "I don't think this is my baby." You could tell he was absolutely devastated. We advised him not to sign the birth certificate until he was sure. Not sure what happened after we sent the baby back out to mom, but I felt awful for the guy. Story 11. Random note from the side of academia. This is why they don't do blood tests compared to your parents in my college, Marshall University, to teach basic genetics. Too many were finding out they didn't have any chance of being their father's child. I only heard the horror stories secondhand, but the results spoke for themselves. Story 12. Happened to my fiancé's mom. His mom is a labor and delivery nurse. One time she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patients like blood type, time spent in the wing, and like how far along. This information is nameless for HIPAA reasons and instead has a patient's number. So this patient happened to be the only one in the wing at the time. Her father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the blood type for the patient on the board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B+. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's blood type. He was O+, and his wife was A. This combination will never yield a B+ baby. He brings his wife out and just points at the board, and this look of shock washes over her. TLDR. Father of patient in labor finds out his wife cuckolded him 25 years later by knowing his blood type Punnett squares. Story 13. I'm a nurse, but this didn't happen to me. Friend of mine got pregnant in high school. She claimed it was our local doctor's son's kid, so he agreed to deliver his grandchild for free. Child delivered, and it was obviously half African American. Doctor's son and girl were both white. I think he still delivered it for free as he was relieved his 14-year-old son wasn't a dad. Edit. Forgot an apostrophe. The doctor didn't impregnate a teenager. It was supposedly his son's kid. It wasn't. Story 14. Labor and delivery nurse here. Black babies are usually a lot lighter at birth. Not everyone is aware of this, so I've had a few dramatic deliveries where the father looks at the baby and accuses the mom of cheating because the baby isn't as dark. Lots of drama happens on L&D Edit. Adding a PSA or pamphlet about this subject wouldn't really help. A lot of people might be extremely offended that you assume the father of the baby would accuse their partner of cheating on them. If the father is accusing the mother of cheating right after the delivery of their child, then their relationship dynamic might not be the best to begin with. Edit 2. I don't mean the baby's weight, rather their skin color. Edit 3. Everyone that's upset about there not being a PSA or pamphlet on this, if you feel that strongly, then please feel free to contact your local hospital to set up education about this. Edit 4. Changed African American, because in true Reddit fashion, people got offended. Story 15. I work in anesthesia. One of my colleagues had someone vaginally deliver a baby with Steve's lunchbox tattooed above the birth canal. The OB/GYN said to the father after the delivery, "Congratulations, Steve." The guy replied that his name was indeed not Steve. Don't know if that counts. Story 16. My son came out and looked really tan. My ex-girlfriend and I are pretty white. I thought for a second she cheated on me. We are now separated for different reasons unrelated to our child. And he is pasty white as. Got one heck of a suntan in the uterus, though. Story 17. Worked in the Army hospital on FT Lewis. A woman came in for belly pain and we found out and told her she was 10 weeks pregnant. The husband at the bedside started laughing, grabbed his coat and left the room, explaining to us that he had been in Afghanistan until 3 weeks prior. He looked back at her and just said, "Well, that's that, Brittany." I always liked how classily he left her while she just silently stared off into space. Story 18. When I was born, the Indian doctor told my very, very white parents, "Ooh, she looks like an ethnic baby." It's a funny story years later, but I imagine that it wasn't so funny when my brunette mother had to explain to my blonde dad that yes, this baby with a full head of long jet black hair was actually his child. I always wondered if my dad had some doubts about me the first few months of my life, before my hair turned blonde. Edit. Here are some baby pics including one next to my brother, who has been blonde since birth. Looking back at these I'm not sure I look ethnic, whatever that means, but I definitely look like the result of an affair with the milkman. Story 19. Not quite what you're asking, but in the same vein. I'm a nurse in a level 4 neonatal ICU. We service the sickest of the sick from our state and the surrounding states, so we see it all. We had a baby that was sick as snot. Lo and behold, we discovered its blood, spinal fluid, etc. was septic with herpes. In most babies, we avoid this by treating the herpes while the mom is pregnant. In this case, the mom didn't even know she was a carrier. So where did it come from? This is the awkward and sickening moment when everyone in the room realized where the herpes came from. Turns out, the father had an affair and contracted the virus from his lover. So yeah, while this woman's baby is on the verge of death, she finds out her husband has been cheating on her, and his cheating is the reason their baby is sick. Story 20. My best friend was dating a girl and knocked her up. They got engaged and planned to get married right after the baby was born. There were about 10 of us in the waiting room waiting for her to crank out the baby. It was essentially her parents. His were in another state, some of her friends, and some of ours. After sitting there for about 2 hours, he walks out with a smirk on his face and says, "Let's go." We all thought something horrible had happened. Her friends asked how the baby is, and he said, "Fine, but black." He motioned for us to go, so we followed him. In the parking garage, he tells us to follow him to his apartment, then sends me a text asking I could put him up for a while. We literally moved him out of his apartment and into my spare bedroom in like an hour tops. Her parents didn't know who to be mad at. The confusion on their faces when he told them the baby was black was priceless. Story 21. I am a nurse working in labor and delivery. Most of the time, if the mom thinks the baby may not be her boyfriend's jock husband's, they will just have their friend, sister, mom with them there for the delivery and have the dad come to the hospital/room after seeing the baby. No guarantees because babies can change a lot over a couple weeks. Many African American babies have very light skin when they are born and it gets darker. I have had a PT's husband get upset about the baby being too light, they were both black, until his mom smacked him and told him that's what he looked like when he was born. Recently, I had something I thought was interesting happen. Girl comes in labor with her boyfriend, sister, and a friend. Boyfriend doesn't seem too engaged during the process, but that's not uncommon. Baby is born and is fine. Sister sends dad to get some stuff. Note here, all people involved are Hispanic and only speak Spanish. My specific medical Spanish is pretty decent, and I can get you through an epidural or delivery. Most things that come up pretty well, but I am not fluent. So as soon as the dad leaves, the sister is like, "I have a question for you," and then process to say something I can't understand at all. I try to clarify, but I'm just not getting it. I offer to go get the translator. She's like, "No, I don't want it to be official." She whips out her phone and through Google Translate asks, "How can we get a paternity test in the hospital?" I then have to explain that we really don't do that, but you can get one at CVS. They tell me that the baby doesn't look like the other child of this mom and this guy and that it might be someone else's, but they want to check before telling him. So I just apologize and tell them how they can get a DNA test at CVS, and they are like $50. This isn't the first time I've been asked about paternity testing, just had no idea how you say it in Spanish. Edit. Thank you to all the people telling me how to say paternity test in Spanish. I appreciate the effort and will try to remember it, but I also have Google Translate. I just didn't understand the words at the time she was asking me, which is why I offered to get a translator. It's not generally accepted for nurses to use their phones to translate at work. Also, yes, you can get a DNA test at CVS. I believe someone in the comments has posted a link. You can also get a DNA test done at a clinic, but it generally costs more. The first time the paternity test thing came up, I asked my manager who said to refer them to CVs, which is what I have heard other nurses do as well. Some hospitals used to offer paternity testing, but many no longer do because it is not usually seen as medically necessary, and as such usually isn't covered by Medicaid or insurance, so the hospital ends up eating the cost. I am not saying that there are no hospitals that still do paternity testing, just that it is not the case at any of the hospitals I have worked at in my area. You don't know anyone else's life circumstances, so it is best to reserve judgment about the choices they have made, or you think they may have made, because not every situation is cut and dry. Plenty of biological fathers leave and do not support their children. Women are not all lying villains. Life is very gray. Just treat people with respect and compassion. Story 22. I'm not a nurse. My professor was an L&D nurse, and she once saw a man running between two delivery rooms. Both women he had impregnated went into labor and gave birth the same day. Supposedly, the one he was married to was angry because the woman he cheated with was impregnated after the wife but had her kid 10 minutes before the wife. L&D is apparently the most drama-filled section of hospitals. My SO is planning to be a nurse, and he's going to work in L&D neonatal this year, and I'm excited to hear any dramatic stories. Story 23. My grandmother was a nurse. Once she was assisting with delivering a baby, and the ostensible father commented that the child looked good for a premature baby. Without thinking, my grandmother told the truth. That baby is not premature. So, I guess I know where I get my social obliviousness from. Story 24. My wife is an RN hospital supervisor. Code yellow is the code over the intercom for security, large male nurses needed. It rarely ever happens, but every now and then over the speakers you hear a code yellow, labor and delivery. You know the reason. Story 25. Kinda off topic, but I gotta give my friend credit for doing something I don't think I could ever do. Found out after being married and having a 3 and 1-year-old, his wife had been cheating on him. Multiple times, with multiple men. Everyone is white though, so no obvious signs. Anyway, when he finds that there is the chance neither of the kids is his, he buys 2 paternity tests. He brought them home, but then the horrible conclusion hit him. He was prepared if they were his. He was prepared if they weren't. He had no fucking idea what he would do if one was and one wasn't. So he threw tests away. They divorced, she keeps seeing people for short times, and he is now remarried to a fantastic person. Story 26. I had a test done on my son when he was about 7 months old. Baby mama constantly told me he wasn't mine, but then came after me for child support. Got the test done, and he was mine. So I hired a lawyer, and we sat and chilled. 4 months later, she's arrested on charges of distribution of meth, where my son lived, and he's been with me for the last 8 years. Now she pays me C.S. Edit. I was remembering events wrong here. I got my kid when he was 11 months old after DHS did a random stop drug test on her, and she failed for meth. I then started a 2-year battle in juvenile court to not allow the state to reunify with the mother. I finally got juvenile court to release my case to district court, where we fought for actual custody. During our district court battle, she took my son for a visit, and I got a call from the cops in a city an hour away that she had been arrested on a domestic with her boyfriend at a hotel. And they searched her and found needles and meth paraphernalia. That was the last time she had him unsupervised. We went about 2 years of her barely calling, seeing him once a month for 10-20 minutes, until she finally got arrested on attempt to distribute meth charges. She got out on bail and was arrested for it again 3 weeks later. She spent 3 years in state prison and has been out about 8 months now. She appears to be clean and just gave me $100 for extra child support yesterday. She's only court-appointed to pay $52 a month. So we're giving her a shot. But she is still and will remain on supervised visits for a long time. The whole fiasco has been such a blur. It's hard to remember exactly when, what, where happened, especially after 4 or 5 years of really not having to deal with her. At the time, it was utter, though. She punched me a couple times, lied under oath, sent me threats, inappropriate photos of her with other men. The list goes on and on. I've really tried to put a lot of it behind me and forget about as much of it as I can to try and help me forgive her so she can at least be somewhat a part of my kid's life, because that's what he wants. I just watch her like a hawk now. Story 27. Not a doctor, but a distant cousin of mine definitely has children that don't belong to the father. My cousin was adopted as an infant and was essentially a crack baby. She struggled with some developmental issues and has a low IQ compared to most, but can still live on her own with little to no issues. She, a white woman, married a Latino guy, really dark brown skin, several years ago, and they had a son together who has dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes. He is easily identified as their son. The real trouble happens years later. Her husband, who we'll call Javier, has some IQ issues of his own. Just a little slow when it comes to tasks and reasoning. Anyway, Javier is in the military and gets deployed internationally for about 6 months. When he comes home, his wife is 4 months pregnant. You do the math. He still believes the baby is his own, even after it's born with pale skin and blonde hair and blue eyes. If that wasn't bad enough, it happens again. 2 years later with another baby. Same blonde hair and blue eyes. Everyone knows she slept with a different man. It was actually her high school boyfriend. but Javier still thinks the children are his. It's kind of sad, but at this point there's not much you can do. He has raised the kids as his own. Story 28. If you guys are enjoying this thread, you should watch Lauren Lake's paternity court on TV. My favorite case was one where the female spent almost the entire 25 minutes going over all this proof that the kid was his, using facial similarities, swearing up and down, and even bringing in witness attest that she was of good character and wouldn't cheat. Even straight insulting the guy, saying how shitty it is he denies his child and won't grow up, etc. Through all of this, the guy just stood there quietly, not saying a word, not defending himself, nothing. Finally, the judge asks if he has anything to say or would like to plead his case. He motions to the only thing on the desk, a manila folder. Plaintiff takes it to the juge. She opens it, reads for a minute, then dismisses the case in the favor of the guy. Turns out he had been deployed overseas in Afghanistan during the year before and during the entire pregnancy and birth. He came home after 4 years and was introduced to his 2-year-old child. Story 29. Neither a doctor or nurse, but a good friend of mine was out of the country on emergency with his work, and I ended up bringing his wife to the ER. My friend and I are, even still, best friends, and all of us went to high school together, and I had no idea his wife was unfaithful. However, I was in the delivery room as she didn't want to be WO anyone there. Baby came out. Straight up Asian. I knew. The OB knew. I just walked out the room then. All I could hear her wailing, saying her marriage is over, and the nurses quickly picked up on why she was crying. I called him and told him the news. He explained to his work that a true emergency was at home, so they chartered him a flight home. Saudi Aramco, high-class action. And he filed for divorce right then and there. During the divorce, out of their 3 kids, 0 was my friend's. It didn't just mess my friend up, it messed the kids up as well because they knew him as daddy. The court tried to make my friend pay support for those kids who weren't his, because they became accustomed to it and the dad abandonment was borderline criminal. He had 0 biological attachment. Family courts are so biased against men. My friend spent a fortune fighting it out of principle and eventually won. It emotionally ruined him, and now he doesn't trust women. He won't go on dates or anything because of it. I can't say I blame him, but that is beyond fucked up. Story 30. My brother's friend was in the army and had a shotgun wedding with a woman he had been dating for a few months. She's white American, and he's white Hispanic. The baby came out black. Until the results came in, she was adamant that the baby was his. She even went to the extent of claiming he was getting her depressed and suicidal and was a bad father because he wouldn't claim his child. The results came back and she said the baby was his, and the paternity test revealed that was a lie. Pretty much she thought she was going to stay with him for that army money. Story 31. A co-worker's aunt just found out her dad wasn't actually her dad. So she was really big into genealogy and had mapped out her family tree as far as she could go. She took one of those ancestry DNA tests about 2 months ago, and her father's side didn't line up with what she was expecting. In fact, she didn't recognize a single name that she was matched with paternally. She casually asked her dad if he knew any of the names, and he recognized the surname of the maintenance man at the apartment complex where he and his wife, aunt's mom, lived shortly after they had gotten married. Claimed he was a lousy repairman who always flirted with his wife, etc. Aunt's mom had passed away a few years ago, so she decided to not tell her dad the news. Story 32. Obligatory. Not a nurse or doctor. My brother told me this story about a man he used to work with. Brother's work friend is from Eastern European country and came to USA many moons ago and started his family here. One of his sons meets a nice girl. They plan to get married, but life happens, and then more life ends up coming out of them. Whole big family is excited about new baby. Father-to-be is absolutely ecstatic. They have a small ceremony before baby is born, yada yada. Delivery time comes and out pops this little boy who is about 50 shades darker than either parent, and new dad absolutely loses his. In his heartbroken rage, he accuses his new bride of cheating on him, disowns said child, and rages right out of the delivery room, leaving new mom all alone with her mountain of shame. This guy returns to his family and continues his hate-filled rampage and exclaims to his family that his of a wife had cheated on him because the baby looked nothing like him in skin tone. The family is shocked. Never would have believed this sweet young thing would do that to their son. Absolute shame and misery all around. Well, sitting in a dark little corner of the room, little tiny grandma chirps up and has a story to tell. Apparently, back in her glory days, during some war or another, she had a great summer with a French soldier. a black French soldier. She got knocked up and he got sent home, and back then, you kept the baby and hoped your family didn't murder you before you could abandon it somewhere. She ended up meeting her husband shortly after getting knocked up, and things just progressed as if it was his child and wouldn't, you know, the little thing popped out white as snow, and she breathed a sigh of relief because this was going to be the easiest lie to keep ever. So this poor has been carrying around this super melanin gene his whole life and knocked up his wife, and it decided to all come out on his sweet little boy who he now has to go crawling back and reclaim. Thankfully, the whole family went with him to the hospital. Old grandma had a picture of her old fella as proof, and husband and wife were reunited. Story 33. I was blood typing a newborn once. Mom was an O+, baby was AB+, which is more or less not possible. I immediately panicked. Because Jesus God, they mixed up the babies. Someone has the wrong baby. We're gonna get sued. They're gonna have to genetic test the entire nursery. What if they subpoena me for being the idiot who discovered the problem? I don't have insurance. What if they sue me? After repeating the test 3 times, I called the floor and told them that they'd either drawn the wrong baby's blood or they'd switched babies because mom couldn't be the baby's mother. Lol no. It was a donor egg. The redraw matched fine. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. Oh God, my heart, though. Story 34. Happened to a dude I knew. He got his GF pregnant just as he was about to break up with her. She was trashy, and he came from a rich family. But she was pregnant, so he did the right thing. Turns out that the kid wasn't his, so he kicked them both out. Apparently, the father of the baby was some poor deadbeat. Story 35. I learned about heteropaternal superfecundation from a friend of mine. She is a 5'0" blonde white girl, introducing me to her 6'5" black twin. Surprises for everyone that day. Story 36. Not a doctor, son nurse, but my dad was accused of being the father to a child that wasn't his. So basically, my dad was accused by a woman he slept with. My dad wasn't exactly the most faithful man. That the child was his, even though the child was mixed. The woman was white, and so is my dad. The case actually went to the Trisha show, like the Jeremy Kyle show, but older. The test results came out, and shockingly enough, he wasn't the father. One moment from the show, Trisha asked my dad, "Do you have any other kids?" And he just smirked. We never really found out how many women he got pregnant in that time, and it's likely I went to school with my brothers and sisters, but neither of us knew we had the same dad. I never really found out what happened to the woman or to the baby either, but I truly do hope that baby grew up healthy and happy, and I hope the mother found peace with herself. Story 37. Not in the hospital, but a friend and his GF were off again, and she got pregnant. She swears it's his. He wants a paternity test. He moves in with her and her mom. She has the baby. Take the test. Test is taking a while to come back. Him and his family are over the moon with the baby. Kind of forget about it. Mentions it to GF's mom one day, and she says, "Oh yeah, she didn't tell you? Came back a while ago, totally your baby." Awesome, all is well. A few months later, they're moving out, and he finds the test in a box, not his baby ETA. He left, tried to stay in the baby's life, but she wouldn't let him.